Today, I've got Peter Kozodoy on the phone, on the other line, who's an award-winning author of Honesty to Greatness, an Inc. 5000 serial entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and business coach who works with organizations and their leaders to help them overcome self-limiting bullshit and use honesty to achieve greatness. His articles on leadership and entrepreneurship have appeared in Forbes, Inc., HuffPost, PR Daily, and more. He holds a BA in economics from British University and an MBA from Columbia Business School, and lives just outside New York City with his wife and their very spoiled dog. To start up an honest conversation, visit peterkozodoy.com. Peter, welcome to the show tonight, mate.
Great to be here, Barry.
So stoked. What I'd like to do is just take a moment just to say welcome to all the viewers, all the listeners who are watching this live, on the replay, wherever you are. And I'm going to ask you to do two things. First of all, just hit the like button to let us know that you're there. That's also going to signal Rafi, who's one of my team, who's just across the interwebs, making sure that he collects all your comments, all your questions, and feeds them through to myself and Peter here. And number two, throughout the next half an hour, 40 minutes, please post all the questions, all the comments you've got, so we get them answered for you guys and make this as tailored as possible for those of you who are watching it this evening. So, Peter, the question I guess I usually like to start with is, like, where does all this start for you? Like, how did you get into a position where you speak around honesty, around greatness, around leadership, and so forth?
Starts with being a complete and utter failure, Barry, like every other good story. Really, and I didn't realize it started this far back until I started down the book journey. But I think it makes the most sense to start at 17-year-old Peter, and I knew two things to be true. The first was I was going to the Olympics as a figure skater. I was a very serious, competitive figure skater, skated from the time I was 3 years old. And the other thing I knew for sure was I was going to Harvard. I grew up outside of Boston in the US, and there was only one school there. I had several extended family members go. So that was just sort of the track that I was on. At 18, it was very clear that I was not going to make the Olympics. I wasn't good enough. I couldn't hold my nerves together when it counted. Also, I applied to Harvard. Harvard sent me a very nice letter back saying, thank you, but no thank you. And, for the first time ever, I had to sort of reckon with the fact that I was on this one life track. And then all of a sudden I'm on a totally different train going another direction saying, wait a minute, this is not the ticket I bought, right? Like what is actually going on here? Now the good thing about failure, Barry, is it fuels, it puts two giant chips on one shoulder. And that's what happened to me to fuel, the growth of my agency throughout my 20s. I came out of college in 2008, great time to start a business, Peter. Started what we thought was a video production company with my business partner, immediately went tens of thousands of dollars into debt, not knowing what the hell we were doing. But, because I'd had those big failures, I was so driven to kind of do my own thing and prove myself. And eventually we grew that into what became an international multi-million-dollar marketing agency, ended up on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in America for a couple of years in a row. And we've worked with startups to Warren Buffett himself. So certainly been a wild ride.
Wow. How do you feel, I guess, honesty comes into play when we're talking about failure? And I'm going somewhere with this, but I'm curious to kind of understand your perspective before I kind of input, I guess, a little bit about my journey over the past couple of years in relationship to that.
Well, you're asking how I sort of got into the whole honesty game?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Yeah, you'd cut out a little bit there. Well, what happened is, everything was going fairly smoothly up until, through my 20s, until tragedy struck. I don't know if this has happened to you, but something terrible happened to me. I don't even like to talk about it that much. But what happened, Barry, is I turned 30. Oh gosh, it just gives me the creeps even saying it, man. And at that point, I sort of looked around and I had a good life, right? I'd grown a 7-figure company. I'd just gotten married. My wife and I were flipping a house. I mean, should have just everything was great, but I didn't feel great. I really looked around. I was like, this again, I had this feeling like I'm on this, I want to be on this track over here. And I'm over here. There were so many things I hadn't done with my life. And I was like, why? Well, what's going on here? And what I realized was that those two big failures I told you about earlier had knocked me back into a second best version of myself. It was like, well, I'm never going to be first best version of Peter. So I'm going to be this other crappier version. And for the first time in my life, I had to get deeply honest with, who I was, where I was going, what I really wanted, what it was going to take to get there. And out of that came so many amazing things. I was shocked to see that once I was willing to be honest about all those things, and learn what honesty even meant, and I'm sure we'll get into that, I was able to achieve more in the 18 months after turning 30, Barry, than I had in the 10 years prior. And that's when everything clicked, and I figured out that honesty is not just this like, oh, like, let's be listen, the Honest to Greatness, it premiered as the #1 new release on Amazon in business ethics. Great, right? I think people should be ethical and nice and all that happy horse crap, but that's not what I'm talking about here, right? That's not what I mean by honesty. This is a book, and what I've found is that honesty is a tool to achieve results. In a century, by the way, where everyone's walking around with a smartphone, recording everything, everyone knows the truth anyway. So the question is, how do we make sure we open up our own blind spots, get out of our own way, and make sure that everyone else doesn't know things that we don't know? And all those things weave into honesty and what it means to be honest and what it means to use it as a weapon to achieve results in your life and business, which is what I am in this book is all about.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that you said there. People went into smartphones. I think the challenge that we have there, though, is that we're often seeing people's highlight reels, and we're comparing their highlight reels to our behind the scenes, which creates this misconception, especially amongst entrepreneurs, of imposter syndrome, or like, what's wrong with me, or why aren't I there yet? And as you mentioned before, though, too, potentially pushes people into the second best version of them, like, oh, I can never be as good as that person, so why even bother? Well, without realizing that part of that honesty you mentioned about, helps you to get what you want. I also think it helps you to live a fulfilling life. And the reason that I say that is that there's something that I've noticed in myself and in our clients is that if you can't first get honest and real with where you're at and find a way to fully accept and appreciate what you've created in this here now moment. Now, I don't mean by accept as in you need to take that as like, this is all that I'm ever going to get. I mean, just come to terms with the fact that this is my creation. The life that I'm living right now is my creation. And therefore, if the decisions that I've taken, the actions that I've done have got me to here, therefore I have the ability and power to create something else. But if I can't first accept and acknowledge and appreciate where I'm at right now, when I get there, it's not going to be any different. I'm still going to find flaws. I'm still going to find things that I wish weren't the case or I want to put away in the closet. I'd love to know your perspective on that.
And that's why I tell, it's easy for people to, you read my bio, right? And I spent a lot of time putting that bio together, right? And there's some awesome stuff I've done. But then the next thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm a failed figure skater who couldn't get into Harvard, right? And I think that's really important for all the reasons that you're saying. I want people to understand that the actual truth behind all the crap we see on Instagram, what's behind the rented Ferrari, like what's behind the fun memes that people put out, but really they're depressed. I really want people to grapple with that so much more, because what happens when we don't get honest, or when we don't ask ourselves, what's really true here, is we miss massive opportunities. We're living in a pandemic where many of the leaders around the world haven't been particularly honest, about how people react to things like this, about what they need to do, what they need to tell people and maybe not tell people, and so on and so forth.
The numbers.
Been a total lack of honesty, right? And that I think is the more threatening thing than COVID-19, because once we push aside honesty and we lose trust, what happens when we get the next pandemic that, by the way, is much more contagious and much more deadly? We're screwed, right? Because we haven't bred this, trustworthy environment. And the same thing, if you bring that down to the microcosm, to humans, it's the same thing. Like, if I don't open up and listen, I've had to learn this, man. Like, I was voted most likely to continue being a jerk in high school and college, right? Like, I was that guy. So if I'm talking to you about honesty and transparency and vulnerability and all this shit, like, trust me, I had to learn it. If I can learn it, anyone can. But here's the thing. Like, as soon as I've learned to open up and share and tell you stuff, and now what happens is we can connect on a much deeper level, right? We're not up here in the figure each other out and like, oh wow, this person's not approachable and all these little psychological strings. I want people to be honest about them, about how we act and how we think and how our egos interfere with our personal communication style, and on and on and on. These things, Barry, will change your life, right? Like, I'm a business coach I've coached hundreds of entrepreneurs, right? Helping them grow a 7-figure business. Some of the strategies we come up with for sales and marketing and operations are awesome, right? but that's not what changes your life. What changes your life is getting honest with yourself, gaining new perspective about how you tick and work, what kind of core values you have and where those come in conflict with those around you. That's the stuff that can actually help you have transformations. And so ironically, most of the work I do, I like to say 99% of business problems are personal problems in disguise, which is true. No matter what your business problem is, it's tied to some sort of self-limiting belief, habit, belief, whatever that's keeping you from making the kind of changes and actions you need to take.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I actually believe 100%. Like, I honestly believe we never have business problems. We have personal problems that get expressed through business.
Totally.
And I found that to be true every single time for myself and for my clients as well. Something you mentioned before too is around leadership. And a really interesting thing, like 2 years ago, one of the areas that I put down for me to focus on was my leadership, because I thought, like, I'm a shitty leader. Like, I'm a terrible leader. Now, others around me didn't necessarily think that, but that was what I felt for myself. And one key thing that I felt brought that around to where I feel that I'm a much better leader, and I know I've still got a long way to go, is around the use of vulnerability. I found the more that I could be vulnerable and share with my teams what's actually going on for me, what I'm feeling, where I might feel like I'm an imposter, where I might feel that I'm letting the team down, letting myself down, the more it allows them to connect on this, like you said, this human level. It also encourages them to bring forth their vulnerabilities and share what's really going on for them personally, which again affects performance of the business. The other thing too, what I notice is this whole trust thing, is that often people will react more to what you do, not what you say. And I've seen in a number of our clients' businesses that when they've made a stand and they've maybe let go of an employee that hasn't been performing, the rest of the staff have gained more trust for their leadership, because they trust that they'll make the hard decisions. They trust they'll make the hard choices when required for the greater good of the whole.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And conversely, think of everything that's lost when your actions are different than your words, right? Like I've worked in so many organizations, and the biggest ones, the Fortune 500s are the worst, right? Where they have these core values like speed, and everyone who works in the organization knows that they are the slowest business ever. They take 6 months to do anything, right? And they would do so much better to just be like, what our core value is? Taking our sweet ass time. We don't do anything fast. We check off every single box and we read every single line to make sure we're making the right decision. And that's fine. And guess what'll happen, Barry? They'll attract the type of employees that love that and that resonate with that kind of culture. And there will be what I call honest alignment. And that's where a business can actually accelerate their gains and make huge wins versus trying to be something that they're not. So yeah, I mean, it's not, I want people to understand, it's not only like, being honest gets you something, being dishonest loses you something. There's opportunity cost and upside benefit.
Yeah, there's so much in what I feel we're speaking about here, because there's also this unconscious pressure that we carry around when we're trying to show up and act and be a certain way, because we perceive that that's what others expect of us, as opposed to just being okay to rock up as you are. If that's in flip-flops and a bonzie, so be it. But rocking up as you are, owning who you are, then actually allows others to both respect and align and acknowledge that. But it also gives them permission to show up as they are as well.
Totally. And what's so funny is like every single human I've ever met admires the person who's just themselves, right? They're like, oh my gosh, that person's so authentic and they don't care about anything. And they just, and they love it, but then they're afraid to do that as well. And that's what's so odd. And what I've had to learn is nobody cares about you, right? Nobody cares about me. They care about themselves. Yeah. So for us to put ourselves out there, we're like, ooh, people are going to judge us. People don't give a shit, right? And that's what I've had to kind of learn. And in that, I've been able to look at those folks who are super authentic and be like, oh, actually, that's an act of attrition. They're just removing the acting, removing the crap, removing the facade. That's actually pretty easy. Everyone can do that. And it's only unfounded fear that holds us back from doing that very powerful thing.
Yeah, which aligns to one of the questions we've got here as well from Greg, which we'll get to in a second. If you are watching live, welcome to the show. Please keep the questions coming through. I'll get to those in just a second. Before I do though, I'd love to kind of talk through like some of the steps of maybe how people can start to transition. Because I remember for me, back when I realized that I wasn't showing up authentically, I was scared shitless of what others would perceive of me, my team, my social following. Like, what would people think if I actually showed up as me and owned all of that? And probably even more than that, Peter, it was like, what would I think of me? Like, do I actually like and love all of me in such a way that I can show up honestly and authentically and own who I am? But yet it was one of the most liberating experiences of my life, and one that's allowed me to actually align to, I guess, a greater life's purpose, and allow me to actually enjoy my life, probably for the first time ever. Like, what are some steps some people can take that maybe are a bit pessimistic, or maybe believe that they're being honest, but between us, know that they're not having the hard conversation, know they're not having the conversation that need to be had?
Yeah, well, let's back up a bit, because before we can ask ourselves, like, how do we be honest, we need to sort of redefine it, right? As I told you earlier, I talked about like an ethics book. Like, it's not as clear as some people would make. In fact, people, when they figured out I was writing and speaking about honesty, they were like, "Oh, Peter, this is so great. I'm honest all the time, and I just tell it like it is, and I don't care." And I'm like, "Well, you're probably just an asshole then, right?" Like, that's not what we're talking about here. Like, we're talking about strategic, brutal honesty. And it's like this, right? Like, one of the CEOs in my books makes the point that if you're riding in an airplane and the flight pilots come over to the intercom and they say, "Well, folks, we've never seen storm clouds like that before, so please buckle your seatbelts. Not quite sure if we're going to be able to land this plane, but we're going to do our best." Is it honest? Yeah, but is it helpful? No, not really, right? As we talked about earlier, honesty is only as good as the trust it creates. So what I do in the book is I stratify honesty into three critical levels that help you kind of get into this and use it, weaponize it. The first is getting honest with and about the community. In other words, what's going on in the world, what's going on in your industry, globally, like, what are the big trends that we're functioning in? Now, we're recording this in 2020, right? We have a pandemic, we have racial injustice, we have gender bias, we have, 18 genders, which we didn't used to have before. So, like, all of this stuff, I mean, we don't have to like it, we don't have to get it, but we do have to acknowledge that all of this is going on, and we operate in this environment. And to put our heads in the sand or to wish it could go back to the 1950s, or that's just not helpful, right? And that's how businesses get stuck. That's how people get stuck and fail to move forward, and at least get curious about what is going on in the world, and how can I make sure I'm not getting trapped in some conspiracy theory, or how do I kind of keep understanding what's going on here. The second level, Barry, is getting honest with and about the others around you. Now, those are two very distinct things. Sometimes we need to level with people, right? Sometimes we need to be the person that says, "You know what? I'm sorry, I messed up. I did a terrible thing, and I apologize. And here are the ways I'm going to fix this." By the way, companies that use this always do extraordinarily well. Think of Domino's Pizza. I don't know if they did this in Australia, but in the US, they ran this campaign 12 years ago. CEO comes on national TV. "Hey, everyone, sorry, our pizza sucks. Our customers don't like it. That's our bad. We're going to fix it. And by the way, we're going to bring the cameras inside the kitchen. We want you to see how we're fixing it. We're going to bring pizza out to customers. We're going to record their reaction so you can believe that we are making this better." And if you had invested in them, by the way, Barry, at that point where the CEO is on TV telling everyone that their pizza sucks, you would have had a 3,000% return over the next 10 years. That's how powerful this stuff is, right? So sometimes we need to be honest with people. Other times we need to be honest about them, about their fears, their ego, their self-limiting beliefs, their outlook. This is why we have all kinds of people running around trying to force their view on other people. That's not honest, right? Instead, why don't you ask a couple questions? Like, "Hey, I hear you don't want to wear a mask. Do you mind telling me more about that? What are you reading? What are you watching? What kind of data are you looking at? Help me understand." Imagine what the world would be like if we had a bunch of people that adopted that much more honest, open-minded approach, right? Because let's be honest, no one in the history of the world has walked up to another person and said, "Hey, everything you think is wrong, and I know the right way, and that's the right way, and you need to change." And have that person go like, "You know what? Holy shit, you're absolutely right. Wow, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I was walking around doing all these things. Wow, so crazy. Thank you for showing me the light." That has never happened, Barry, right? So, about people as well. And then the third level is being honest with and about yourself, with your own biases and self-limiting beliefs as a leader. And this comes back to exactly what you were asking. How do you overcome the fear that it takes to just simply be honest, be yourself? Not in a way that's going to insult other people. We covered that, right? But in a way that's going to be, okay, what do I actually believe? What are my actual core values? When somebody asks me, hey, how are you doing? And I say, good, good. Is that true? Start there. Start with the small things. And again, this is sort of, I talk about this as in terms of the hourglass of honesty in my book. How, once you descend these levels, you actually can make rapid transformations, and it sort of comes back out the other side. But a lot of this is cyclical as well. Once you kind of start to open up your mind about what's going on in the world and start to really examine the people around you and asking, like, what are their core values? What is this people communicating to me about what they believe and what their fears are? And you can all of a sudden start to learn more about yourself. And through that entire process, Barry, what I found is people get a lot more, they go from, I am certain about these things, to, wow, I know nothing. I don't know. And those, by the way, are the 3 little words that every CEO in my book, from an 11-year-old Girl Scout who sold 30,000 boxes of cookies to Warren Buffett himself, they love those words, I don't know. And that's what's honest, right? Because we don't know. And as soon as we operate from there, then if we don't know how people will react to our honest self, or if we're not even sure what our honest self even is, then what are we going to be afraid of? Why shouldn't I tell you that I'm a failed figure skater? What are you going to do with that? And that's where the power comes from.
Yeah, I love that. Most people are more worried about themselves than they are about you in that case as well. I love the way you've distilled those 3 levels. I've got some questions here I'd love to jump into as well. One's from Greg from Melbourne. Not that I'm pessimistic with Peter's message, but what are instances of huge opportunities for honesty and values as everyone tries to save his or her skin during these periods of crisis?
Self-preservation is one of the most powerful things outside of, I would say, like, there's sex drive, and then there's like hunger, and there's probably like self-preservation in general, right? And unfortunately, we see this in companies, large and small, where they have really terrible cultures. I mean, let's be honest. Now, let's tell a brief story about Netflix. Everyone knows that Netflix came up and put Blockbuster Video out of business. Did you have Blockbuster in Australia?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what's interesting about that story is few people realize that Blockbuster had years to do something and to catch up. Netflix tried to sell itself to Blockbuster way back when, and Blockbuster said no. There were meetings. There were there was over years, and not like 2 years, like 8-10 years. In fact, Blockbuster eventually did take a look at what Netflix was doing, and they were like, maybe we should do something like that. They started up their Total Access program. They actually had 2 million subscribers at the height, and then another activist investor came in and shut it down. The reason why this story is so important is because I want you to picture yourself in that boardroom. Okay, you're in the boardroom of Blockbuster. Netflix is up and coming. You see it. You got smart Ivy League MBAs everywhere. You've got people who've been in this business a long time. It's an $8.7 billion company. Why do you think they failed to do something, take some drastic action, right? Now, we can assume that they're a bunch of morons, but I think that would be a little short-sighted, right? I mean, nobody who's genuinely stupid rises through the ranks and becomes an executive of a multi-billion-dollar company, right? What I want you to see this as is dishonesty. They failed to get honest with themselves that the world was changing, that consumer habits were changing, and that they needed to change. In other words, they clung to the status quo. They clung to what they thought was self-preservation. Okay? What we have in the 21st century is a world that's moving so fast that we're like clinging to a tree that the hurricane has come and uprooted and is moving down the river anyway. And we're saying, no, but I got the tree, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So one of the things we have to do is recognize this, right? Warren Buffett actually has a phrase for this. He calls it the institutional imperative, right? People just like cling to self-preservation of the status quo and can't release it. And he has taken steps in Berkshire Hathaway to make sure that his CEOs, around the country don't succumb to these really strong pulls. But one of the most important things we can do is actually just sit around and have conversations about, like, what are we really doing here? Like, what are we clinging to? What are we trying to preserve? Is that worth preserving, by the way? Yeah, it's scary. Change sucks. Nobody wants to go through that. But let's be honest, it's coming for us anyway. Yeah. And if we're not going to be the ones to disrupt ourselves, someone else is going to disrupt us. And that's a message that I think, for instance, right now in the world, a lot of restaurants are hearing loud and clear. It's like they could have built, you know, a digital business. They could have done more takeout. They could, but why, right? Well, nobody could have seen pandemic, and the world is going virtual anyway. So for any business owner out there, anyone in business, period, look at the rapid shifts that are going on now and ask yourself, how many of those are going away? And now what do I need to do to prepare for the future? That's honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And the pandemic, you know, what we're going through has just sped up the evolution 5 to 10 years anyway. But, you know, circle back to what you said, you know, I think a challenge that we're all faced with, and it's almost a silent killer, is our own unconscious biases. You know, we've all grown up in these environments where we've created these beliefs, and these beliefs have been there for so long that they're part of identity and who we are.
Totally.
And so therefore, we don't even think to question them. It's like, imagine if you grew up and since you could remember, you were wearing glasses with red lenses. Now, if you wore those glasses for long enough, like if someone asked you, like, what color is the sky? You'd be like, it's red. Right? With absolute 100% certainty, because you've been seeing it that way for as long as you can remember. It's not till someone comes along and takes those glasses off, you realize the sky is actually blue or white or golden, depending on the time of the day. Right? This is what's happening to you and I and everybody else out there every single day of our freaking lives, is that we're seeing life through our conscious and unconscious filters, many of which have been there for so long we've stopped questioning. And when we get up every day and we're so busy in our business from you know 8 to 6 or whatever time is, we're not having the time to step back and to stop and to question, as you mentioned before, like ask ourselves, like, what do we believe? And are those beliefs getting us close to where we want to go? Or do we need to start thinking about something different now? And it's only through creating space, first realizing that they're there, second through creating space to start to question them, that we can start to, I guess, uncouple and loosen off these paradigms we've carried for most of our lives.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. It's so dangerous. And what's even more dangerous, for some inexplicable reason, is we've popularized this idea of like my truth. I'm going to speak my truth. What the hell? Like, no, let's try to get to the truth. And listen, the philosophers out there will be saying, well, you know, I read this great piece in some scientific magazine. It's like, listen, math isn't even true because it's created by humans. And I get that. We can certainly get closer to a consensus than we do today, where it's like, well, that's my perspective, and so that's right. It's like, oh, wow, that's so dangerous, Barry. It really, that scares me more than anything else going on in the world today.
Yeah, there's a fantastic episode that I recorded this morning. If any of you guys checked that out or didn't check it out, I highly recommend it. It was with Gina Mollicone, and she speaks about very much this, and goes through a methodology and a model to start to help us to, you know, loosen the I guess attachments we've got to our truth and our perspective of life. So certainly check that out. Thanks for the question, Greg. I've got a question here from Dave from Sydney. Peter wrote in his book about attracting and inspiring the best talent in any industry. How could that be leveraged in case some human capital in some cities are just waiting for new normal situations, allowing more travel and reopening of businesses? Is retaining talent still possible in pre-COVID sense?
Absolutely. Now, I mean, when you say retain talent, I mean, I can't promise you'll retain it in that location, but retain it at an organization? Absolutely. And it's so simple, right? One of the businesses I talk about in my book is the Ritz Carlton. And, you know, the Ritz Carlton, luxury hotel chain all around the world, came out of nowhere and just dominated the luxury hotel space. How'd they do it? They realized that, yeah, they were in the hospitality business, but they really had needed to solve their major problem, which was, how do we take exceptional care of people, of customers, if our people keep leaving? Because in the hotel industry, turnover rate is extremely high. It's like 80%. At the Ritz, it's like, I want to say 11%, something like that. I mean, something crazy low. How'd they do it? Well, most people don't realize that the Ritz-Carlton is not a hospitality company. It is a leadership company. Its main line of business is training leaders, the leaders who work on their properties. Why is this important? Well, because most executives, even today, for some unknown reason, rule with an iron fist, right? It's command and control, military. But what the Ritz realized was that their executives, who are who knows where, have zero control over what happens in their tens of properties every day. The people with control are the frontline employees, the chefs, the butlers, the doormen, the receptionists, right? They are the ones who give all of the service. They are the ones who control the customer's destiny. When they realized that, they said, well, in that case, we can't have employees. We need leaders. And they literally opened a leadership center to make sure that they were only hiring and training leaders. And if you go to a Ritz Carlton, what most people don't realize is that each employee can spend up to $2,000 on you to make your stay absolutely impeccable. They don't need to get approval from anyone. They are the leaders. That's their prerogative. Now think about that. You can choose where to work, especially now in 2020. You work from home for any organization around the world. Why wouldn't you want to work for the one that says, you know what? You're a leader. We're going to train you to be a leader. We're going to give you all the tools, and you're the one empowered to make all the decisions because you're the one who has all the power anyway. Who doesn't want to work in an environment like that? Where else are you going to go that's going to give you that combination? Now, I think as organizations realize that that's a lot more honest of a way to function because those executives don't have control, they're going to move in that direction. And Quicken Loans and Berkshire that we've talked about, and Sprint, and all, like, there are tons of other companies I profile in the book that take that route. But that's why retention it's not only possible, it is downright, like, all you have to do is be honest about those things, and it's a given. And it's so clear and obvious to all of us. And I hope, big companies around the world begin to get this and make those changes.
Yeah. Team, from my experience, team don't leave because they're poached or because they get offered more money. They leave because their core needs as a human being aren't being met. They're not feeling valued. They don't feel like they belong, and they're not contributing to a cause greater than themselves. Now, sure, they need to be paid a decent salary that provides safety and security for them and their family. But I've worked with organizations that have retained staff for 20 and 30 years, staff that have been offered more money to go elsewhere and have turned it down because the sense of belonging and culture and connection that they have, the risk of losing that is far greater than them staying and losing a small amount of money that they would get going elsewhere.
Totally. We studied this at Columbia. The number one reason employees leave is because of their boss.
Yeah.
Because their boss is a jerk, or won't let them run with their ideas, or won't let them do much of anything, or is some sort of gatekeeper. I hate that word, right? I talk about waterfall culture, being an enabler, not a gatekeeper. That's how Rocket Mortgage was created. How Quicken Loans stole the entire mortgage industry here in the States because they let their employees run with stuff. An employee who comes with an idea and they're like, oh, okay, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, right? I don't know. We love that phrase. So why don't you go do that and let us know how it goes? Good luck. Let me know how I can help. Like, that's what their managers do. Again, who wouldn't want to work in an environment like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So true. Good question, Dave. One last question about viral social media phenomenon Peter would know. What are his thoughts on cancel culture?
Gosh, don't get me started on social media. I think it's terrible. I think the idea of canceling anyone or anything, you lose so much opportunity there. You take them. Let me tell you another story, right? There was once a guy, who's white, extremely racist, lived a couple doors down from a black gentleman, and they would just constantly have this hatred, this battle, right? One day, the white guy gets into an accident, ends up in the hospital. And he looks over from his bed, and there is his African-American neighbor. He's like, great, awesome. Now we have to share a room. And the first day, didn't say a word to each other. Second day, didn't say a word to each other. Third, fourth, fifth day, week goes by. Finally, they look over in the morning. One sort of nods their head. Another week goes by. They exchange a few words, good morning, good evening. Another week goes by. One notices the other didn't actually get their dessert. Those hospital pudding cups. You can't live without those. And so the guy gives him his pudding cup. He says, you have it. And over time, they build a relationship and they walk out as friends. The reason I bring that up is because of what I said earlier. When you just shout someone down, tell them they're wrong, tell them all the reasons that they need to change, that's not what works. So when we cancel anyone's opinion, we lose the opportunity to come together and slowly over time ask open-ended questions and create a human relationship. That's what changes minds, right? Humanizing whatever we're going through, whatever we're afraid of, whatever we hate, that's what works. When we deny ourselves that by saying, well, you're a racist, so, I'm never going to talk to you again, or you're, gender by whatever it is, right? We lose opportunities to ask, tell me more about that. Tell me where you're coming from. Oh, now I understand why you're believing in all these conspiracy theories, because you're afraid, because the media has lied to you for a long time. Get that? You can't trust folks. I understand that. That makes me wonder if there are other ways we can ask ourselves the two questions that I want to leave you with, Barry, and that I want everyone to ask themselves, which is that true? And how do I know? That's how you begin to, as you said, like loosen these bonds and beliefs. Just asking ourselves and others, like, is that true? How do I know? How do you know? How can we figure out what is true? And what's not true is that we can all, survive as a cohesive culture by telling each other that we suck. That's not, it's just not going to work. So yeah, the whole cancel culture thing, it's really quite sad.
Yeah, love that. Great answer for that one. And good question there, Greg. So mate, how could people connect with you that are wanting to maybe find out more about your book or find out more about what you do?
Sure. So head to honesttogreatness.com. That's honesttogreatness.com. And on that site, you can take the free 21 question honesty quiz, which will tell you how honest you really are, if you're brave enough to know, and get you into the material and thinking about how do you use this stuff tactically. Of course, pick up a copy of Honest to Greatness everywhere books are sold. It is the 2020 Indie Book Award winner in business, which is fantastic. I was super honored to get that. And listen, buy them for your friends and family. Of course, try not to hand a copy to someone needs to be more honest with a wink and be like, hey, you really need this one. Like that probably won't go over well. I don't recommend you take that tack.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And one final question, mate. If you would have a conversation with a 10-year-old version of you, knowing everything you know now, what advice would you give him?
Stop worrying. Yeah, just don't worry. As my business partner says, worry doesn't solve anything. And there's nothing to worry about as long as we, keep being honest.
Yeah, love that. And look, if you're enjoying these episodes, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook as well, so you can stay up to date with the amazing guests like Peter we've got coming on every single week. Peter, thank you so much for your time and everything you've shared today. And thank you to each and every one of you guys that have tuned in today live or are watching it on the replay as well. Thanks,
My
mate.
pleasure. Thanks for being honest.